Alright boys, welcome back to another video. Swaggy here, coming at you guys at 10:30 p.m. If you're over on the East Coast, shout out to you guys for staying up for this game. The Vikings are 12-2, the Lions are 12-2. As of right now, Detroit has the tiebreaker, but these two teams will meet in Week 18. It is in Ford Field, Detroit, Michigan, of course. I did tell you guys that the Bills would beat the Lions, and then Week 18 would potentially set up this division and potentially the NFC in general. Now, the thing for the Vikings is that they did win this game. We'll get into it. We'll break it all down. But they also have a brutal schedule the rest of the way. They have to go to Seattle. They're at home against the Packers, and they're on the road against the Lions. So they got to win these next three to win the conference, to win the division. But all you needed was a chance. The Vikings got it. And if we're being honest, the Vikings can beat anyone in football, especially the Lions. The last time these two teams played, it came down to a game-winning field goal back in Week 7. You go back to the Packers game, that was actually a Vikings win back in Week 4. So Minnesota, they believe they can beat anyone. They've got one of the best defenses in football, offensively speaking. They've got a lot of playmakers. Aaron Jones, it's good to see him find the end zone, 18 of 86 with a touchdown. He also gives you some receiving yards as well, 2 catches for 20 yards. So he goes over 100 yards from scrimmage. We also saw Justin Jefferson find the end zone, 7 for 73. Jordan Addison, 7 for 63. TJ Hawkinson, who of course came back off the IR, a couple of games ago, 5 for 52. So the Vikings, I mean, they're about as healthy as it gets, especially just where most of these contending teams are at, like the Chiefs. You got a team like the Lions, and the Vikings are hanging in there. And Sam Darnold, to me, is the biggest story, not only for the Vikings right now, but in football, because he's a pending free agent. He's on a 1-year deal, I believe 10 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. What do the Vikings do here? Do they pay him? Do they keep him long term? Or do they go to JJ McCarthy, who of course they moved up to get? Ultimately, I do think Darnold will leave the Vikings. I think McCarthy will be the guy moving forward. And I liked McCarthy coming out of Michigan, of course, but I'm not going to get too much in him because we want to talk about this game. But that's just something that fascinates me as well, is because Darnold, he's playing like an MVP. He's not Josh Allen, don't get me wrong. He's not Lamar Jackson. But the next tier, like, I'll put Joe Burrow in that first tier. But again, the next tier is Darnold and Evan Baker and all these guys, like 28 touchdowns, 10 picks. He's 14th in QBR. He's 10th in passing yards. I don't think this is updated as well. But still, Darnold, in this one, he ends up throwing a pick. He does throw a touchdown, though. And, of course, he gives you, I think Darnold had like 231. I was getting 225. Yeah, he had 231 yards, 24 of 40. I don't think this was his best game by any means. The defense won the Vikings this one. But they've won games with their offense, their defense. They've done it both together. But Caleb Williams, guys, 18 of 31, 191, 1 touchdown. The Bears struggled, to say the least. They did run the ball decently well. It wasn't elite by any means, but 29, 113. But the Bears had chances early on in this game. They decided to go for it on 4th down. A turnover cost them, but they just took points off of the board. And when you're playing a team like the Vikings, I get being aggressive and wanting to score a touchdown, but sometimes you just have to kick the field goals and just, again, put points on the board and get closer. The Bears didn't do that, and they've struggled this entire season offensively. They've struggled on both sides, but especially offensively. They've got one of the worst offenses in football. Keenan Allen did find the end zone in this 4th quarter. DJ Moore, 8 for 46. Odunze, the rookie, of course, 2 for 39. The Vikings defense was just all over the place. I mean, they held the divisional team to 12 points. And normally late in the year, you're facing divisional teams who aren't playing for much. It could be kind of a sneaky game, of course, but the Vikings were having none of it, man. They just controlled this game early. They got up 10 points, and they just never let their foot off of the gas. Very, very good win from Minnesota, and I'm excited to see what they do the rest of the season. This game wasn't all that competitive. I mean, the Bears made it somewhat interesting late in this game where they scored a touchdown. They end up blocking a punt, but they just don't have enough right now to be able to compete with the 12-2 Vikings, who are now 7-1 at home. Minnesota is very interesting to me because I think they're legitimately on the same level as the Philadelphia Eagles. The Lions, with all those injuries, I do think the Vikings have an edge on them. It's just going to come down to, can they get into a situation to where they play for the division in Week 18? But Philadelphia, I think they're probably tied with the Vikings. Well, they literally are tied, like, mathematically, but just from like my eye test of watching the games, I think the 2 best teams, and honestly, I would say the 3 best teams in football, the Bills, the Eagles, and the Vikings, in no particular order. So it's going to be interesting just to see how this unfolds. But in terms of the Lions, let's go ahead and let's pull up their schedule and see what they're who they're taking on. So they're at Chicago, at San Francisco, and then versus Minnesota. Early on in the season, you would have thought that those would be two tough games in week 16 and 17, but just two teams aren't playing for anything. So the Lions will certainly get those. And then I expect the Vikings to be able to take care of business in Seattle and be able to take care of business as well in their week 17 game, just because they know the stakes are so high. You want to get the 1 seed. You want to win the division for a home field in the first round. The Vikings, again, are 7-1 at home, so they know they've got that advantage, but it's also just winning the NFC gives you that first round bye. If you end up being, let's say, the 5th seed, you're talking about playing against the Rams in the first round. Nobody wants to take on the Rams in the first round. That's probably the toughest first round matchup of them all. Legitimately, I would say the Rams is even more difficult than the Packers. Vikings fans might disagree, but I would not want the Rams coming into my building, man. No, no, no. If you're the 2 seed, you're talking about the Commanders right now with a rookie quarterback who's playing well, but the Commanders have kind of fallen off. I don't think they're the best team in the world. And the 1 seed having that bye, taking on the lowest seed. So, like, for example, let's say I don't know, the 5th seed ends up like beating the 4th seed. So all of a sudden, I mean, and you're at home in that game too. So you want to get the 1 seed. The 1 seed's so crucial. You only got to win 3 games in the playoffs versus having to win 4. And that's a big deal, man. If I'm being completely honest, because the NFC is no joke. I think the Commanders, they still would have a chance to beat the 2 seed. Like the Packers could beat the 3 seed. The Rams could beat. I guess to this point we'd be talking about, yeah, the Rams would be taking on the Vikings as of right now, and then we'd have the 3 and the Bucks and the Packers. Bucks and the Packers is really interesting. The NFC is just absolutely just wonky right now. I can't wait to see how it unfolds. But Minnesota, I mean, I did not expect them to be this good, man. I'm not surprised that they're a playoff team, that they're crushing it, but to be 12-2, this defense, I mean, they did have a huge offseason, though, with going and getting Van Ginkel, going and getting, of course, Jonathan Grenard, offensive side of the ball, getting Aaron Jones. So they made some good moves. They've got Kevin O'Connell, who I always really liked. I mean, when you really think about it, it was kind of foolish to doubt the Vikings. I know a lot of people were high in the Bears. I thought the Bears would be much better than they are, but again, that's what happens when you trust the Bears. But it's just won and loss up front, and the Vikings have been crushing it all season there. They're very similar to the Denver Broncos. They remind me a little bit of Denver defensively, where they can just get pressure rushing 4, and then they can drop 7 back into coverage, or they can just dial it up. It doesn't really matter. But you got to give credit to, of course, Brian Flores. Of course, came from the Bill Belichick tree. He's just got a lot of guys playing at the highest level they have, and it's a lot of names that aren't the biggest in the world. I mean, I know it probably sounds like a broken record at this point. The Vikings are getting a lot of recognition, but like Josh Metellus is a guy who, of course, you go back to when he was drafted in 2020. He was a 6th-round pick. I mean, he's basically an underdog story. He's just played so well for them at different positions. Blake Cashman, by the way, is another guy that they brought over from the Texans, one of the best coverage linebackers in football. Jamin Davis they picked up, very athletic linebacker. Originally was a safety, I want to say, so that's pretty cool. But they've got a lot of names that like I don't even really recognize, and I cover football for a living, but they're just playing well. And they're also without Ivan Pace Jr., who I thought was good last season. Dallas Turner, of course, rookie out of Alabama's fun. Mekhi Blackman, very talented. Defensive back is on the IR, so and Gilmore didn't play in this one as well. So they're without a lot of good players, but they're still stepping up, and defensively they're crushing it. And they actually won me my fantasy week. I won by 1 point because of that field goal. I was facing the Bears defense. So hell yeah, go Vikings just because of that. Peace.